I'm Richard Hayes. I am a now retired New Testament professor from Duke Divinity School. It's my honor this morning to introduce Micheál Ó Siail, one of the most important poets of our time. He's also one of the most prolific. He's published 16 collections of poetry, including a very large volume of collected poems, a volume of about 800 pages published roughly 5 years ago. 5 years, Micheál? 6, yeah. Today, we're going to hear excerpts from his most recent work, the 5 Quintets. This remarkable work, Micheál's magnum opus, received the Conference on Christianity and Literature's 2019 Book of the Year Award. I think it would be fair to say that the 5 Quintets is not only the Book of the Year, but also the most significant large-scale poetic work produced in the span of our lifetime. Micheál will offer a few words of introduction to this work and give us a reading of just a tantalizingly few selections from it. Interspersed with the readings, we will also hear 2 piano compositions by Jeremy Begbie. These compositions are inspired by the poetry, and he will perform them for us, interwoven with the reading. Following the reading, I will offer a brief response and engage with Micheál in conversation about the poem. And then the final few minutes of our time together, we'll once again try to leave some time for questions and answers from you. So with a warm welcome to Duke Divinity School, I give you Micheál Ó Siail.
Be with me, Madam Jazz, I urge you now. Riff in me so I can conjure how you breathe in us more than we dare allow. In words and hues and tones, please, Madam Blow, play in me the grace I need to know how in your complex glory we let go. Show how an open hand is worry-free. Spark again your love's economy, your generous first words spoken, let there be. Enhance our trust in hard-earned betterment, humbler world where we may in turn augment in long adagios of increment. While marveling at your choreography, stars and quarks beyond our mastery, we still explore to praise your mystery. Although each sacred book is a lips-read score, improvising, there is always more. You jazz and what's your own, and our rapport. Each solo an ensemble of a piece, grooves and tempos shifting without cease. We flourish in a syncopated piece. In all our imperfections we advance, trusting in creation's free-willed chance. Sweet Madam Jazz, in you we are the dance. Thank you to all who invited me to be here, and thank you all for coming. That is I just read the epigraph to the 5 Quintets. The 5 Quintets is a sort of sustained meditation on modernity over the last 400 years or so, in conversation with the movers and shakers in all the different domains throughout those 400 years. It's an attempt both to take stock of where we are and to suggest a vision or to think about where we might be headed. I think there's been a paradigm shift. I think we're all agreed that there has been something, some call it post-modernity or chastened modernity or whatever, but there's been some sort of fall of the old certainties within our time. Now, Dante summed up the Middle Ages on the cusp of modernity, and the five quintets tries to sum up the last 400 years, and as I said, also to think as to where we might be headed. So just a word about the structure of the book. I wanted to capture the fabric of society, so there are actually these five quintets, one on the arts, one in economics, one on politics, one on science, and finally one on meaning, that is to say, philosophy stroke theology. Now, each quintet has a different form. I wanted to mix both classic and invented forms. So there's one is in iambic pentameter, another is in terza rima. There's one in what I call cycles, which is a mix of sonnets and haikus. And there's two invented forms. So just to give you that a brief account of the form. Now, Dante, as you know, had a three-part structure, famously hell, purgatory, and heaven. The five quintets has five parts in each of the quintets. I call them cantos, five cantos. I was fascinated, of course, by Dante's triple one, but I felt I needed a five. The first one is transitional figures, figures who mark the transition from medieval times into modernity. Just think of Cervantes in literature, for instance, who mocked chivalry with a slight nostalgia as he marked the entrance into modernity. Then think of Adam Smith, obviously, in economics. Think of Copernicus in science, telling us that we had to humble ourselves. We went around the sun, not the sun around us. Obviously, in terms of religion or theology, philosophy, Luther is a very, very tremendously important transitional figure. But the person, so then leaving behind this first canto with the transitional figures, we come to a phase which leads towards what I will call the nadir, or the roughly corresponding to Dante's hell, likely trace, but nevertheless corresponding, is this move within the arts towards a greater liberty, a sort of a freeing up from what they had in medieval times. On the other hand, in politics, it becomes more of a fixity, more a tightening of things. Interesting in economics, it becomes a sort of reaction to the Adam Smith, a reaction to the idea that we're controlled by rules in our economy. Then comes the third canto, which I describe as the nadir of modernity, and as I said, lightly hinting towards Dante's hell. In the arts, of course, for my mind, this became an excessive interiority, an excessive removal from community of any sort. And of course, in politics, clearly it became all these terrible ideologies and isms in which we got imprisoned. The fourth canto, then, is figures who realized that modernity was losing its way and that we needed a fresh vision. They seek, from my mind, these people, they seek a fresh vision and they contribute something towards it, but they actually don't make the heaven as I would see it. So that this fourth canto roughly, very roughly and vaguely alludes to Dante's Purgatory. The final canto, the fifth one, is where I gather together historical figures, not chronologically this time, but from across the 400 years. They're my saints and stars, the people whom I want to spend time with. They're my heaven. I think all of the characters, of course, are fixed in their time and place, but these people in heaven seem to me to transcend their times in a way which points towards where we might find our vision as we are now. So I'm going to just read some of these conversations for you, but I should say before I start that I'm going to concentrate on the arts, because I'm doing it in poetry, and of course because this is arts and theology, I will include some final section from the theology/philosophy quintet. I normally include some economics and politics, but because of time, I won't today. So I'm going to begin with a sample from Canto 1. This is the traditional figures. Now, I mentioned some of them before to you in the different disciplines, but in this discipline you have people like Milton, who of course is the great poet of the Reformation. You have Rubens, the painter who represents the rise of the bourgeoisie. He didn't want to depend on bishops and patrons anymore. Handel, who fascinatingly brought music out of the concert hall into something which would become, out of the church into something that would become the concert hall. However, the figure I have chosen to represent this is John Donne, who Jeremy quoted last night. He fascinates me because he is on this cusp of modernity. Sometimes the sun goes around the earth, and sometimes the earth goes around the sun for Donne. So just as I read these, the first one, I address the figure involved. Then the figure, these are in sonnets. The second sonnet then will be the figure answering me, John Donne answering me in this case. The third one, I address again the person involved. And in the fourth one, I leave the last word always to the person I'm addressing. John Donne. Are you that wanton Jack or Dr. Donne? Or both, becoming every part you play, a lover chiding the unruly son, or preacher warning all who disobey? Are you the Catholic boy, your mother's son, whose people still would rather die than stray? Or Protestant believing all are one, that all may hear, Lord, hear us when we pray? The new philosopher whose sun must stay and bid the passive earth about it run, or wooer whose sun's motions trace a day to thwart love makings only just begun. In showy puns, in each fan-tailed conceit, your actor's role and you conspire to meet. Why can't you fathom all my reasons why my tortured brother gave his chaplain's name, then died in jail of fever and of shame? A strutting youth, I didn't want to die. Why can't you see the whys that underlie why Jack and Dr. Donne are both the same? I underwent travail and overcame my youthful self, my overweening eye. So what if now the sun commands the sky? Philosophy can claim and counterclaim. To ask God's mercy is the preacher's aim. Hear us, weak echoes, O thou ear and cry. My words take up each mood and moment's cue. No player has our playwright's overview. Although your thought takes words, and words takes wings, there's still some self-absorption in your tone, as brooding on your life's imaginings, an inward mind makes every world its own. A time so full of angst and hankerings, of reason not content with what's unknown, your God becomes the workman of all things. You too have stepped beyond the hallowed zone. Whilst our physicians by their lore are grown, and we don't hang from old wife's apron strings, that self-same faith in reason will dethrone a God who trusts to sacred righted kings. Enchanted worlds begin to disappear once you have walked outside the sacred sphere. No Shakespeare hiding in a bigger cast. I struck the stage of my dramatic mind. You too were once a young iconoclast, determined, self-assured, and flying blind. A later self or youth's own counterblast, again like me, you leave one act behind, and in one woman's love rewrite a past that childhood's flaws and hurts had undermined. My poems are moods I wanted to outlast myself and catch the thrill of thought refined. For all our likeness, so much to contrast. I bless your Dantean sweep of humankind. Three-person God is battering you to see what was and is now shaping what's to be. I move to the second canto, where you see this move towards greater freedom, towards liberation, which of course I'm thinking of people who show us a move towards romanticism, towards the replacement of God by sublimity, by individualism. It's a complete different move away, and prepares, of course, for the Nadir in some ways. The person I've chosen out of this, it's represented in the book by Goya, by Goethe, by Beethoven, and finally by Baudelaire. But the person I've chosen is Wordsworth, as very much the romantic, and still, when people think of poets, it's still that sort of notion of the romantic that Wordsworth created that informs your picture of a poet. So again, this conversation, and this time with Wordsworth. Tall Wordsworth, orphaned in your 14th year, hill-rambling inward Cumberlander boy, a presence still disturbs you with its joy, fostering both by beauty and by fear. Between what's real and thought's own vanity, in both the object seen and eye that sees, I hear, in spite of your love, hate unease, the still sad music of humanity. Your footfalls echo, thither I repaired, scout-like, and gained the summit. It was day, and yet those plainer lives you try to probe all lack the stitch and pain of suffering shared. Your cheerful faith that nature won't betray, unthreaded through the needle eye of Job. Those years when France and Godwin stepped beyond the limits of experience and truth, the dedicated spirit of my youth demanded life and reason correspond. I tramped the inner landscapes of my mind and scrambled hillsides shelf by lonely shelf. The man whose eye is ever on himself. Does nature mend what reason undermined? Once healed, I then had learned, or think I learned, to coax in hearts that had been turned aside from nature's way by outside accidents, the joy and peace that habitude prevents us feeling, and how nature is our guide. My world delights in reason's tables turned. I know you're renovating spots of time. The mind revives again while here I stand, but what became of epics you had planned? Those sheer rock faces Coleridge dreamed you'd climb. You gain a name, but soon you will solidify. The aura of your steadiness, a sneer at Coleridge's old bony maronnier. You fear his skinny hand and glittering eye. A radical returned to yeoman class, you change with Latin words and measured speech, the prelude to a work you'll never write. Those years of safe escapes and gravitas, of feelings gathered with hindsight's delight, all foothills to the peaks you'll never reach. laureate in me had grown too tame. Cocooned by wife, by sister reassured, my wilder ecstasies so soon matured. Was I too hooked on opiates of fame? My first French love I shouldn't have played down, or let addicted Coleridge thorn my side, a climber whose base campers wound his pride. Was I imprisoned in my own renown? A glory and a dream were once my youth, but daily farther from the east I mused on first-hand joys and tranquiller reruns, hints sanctified by reason and by truth, of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns. Now for the fourth canto. These are the people, as I suggested earlier, who seek a new direction for modernity, but whose vision for me falls somewhat short. People representing this in this canto for me are Dostoevsky, whose insight to compassion was very, very extraordinary. And Mahler, isn't it? Of Mahler, it was said that every silver lining had a cloud. Then comes Rilke, who was an extraordinary poet, one of my great favorites, but somehow he didn't quite make the joy. And Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, who turned to sensuality as something I rather love, but not complete enough for me for paradise. The person I've chosen from this section is T.S. Eliot. It seems to me that T.S. Eliot was quite extraordinary. I love the four quartets, but I feel that he got the fire, he got the purification, he got the selflessness, but somehow for me, he doesn't get the joy of the resurrection. He doesn't get paradise. Your tone, impersonal and passionless, as ruling your own roost in Russell Square, you turn our pained superior, T.S., to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Your grandfather ingrained in you, and Eliot commands a Hamlet you're not meant to be, with chilly politesse and touch me not, more English than the English care to be. And yet, however steely and astute, aware how wastelands of the self can slide, your temperament demands an absolute to order seas of doubt which rage inside the tooted gullet of the aged shark. And will you dare to leap out from the dark? You know the fear I barely hold at bay, the littered waste that lines the ocean floor, my dreaded void, our cultural decay, how I by will belong to right and lore. Tradition I must bow to and then bend, as even in my leap I ease my arc, so each beginning gestures towards its end, as I both dare the light and hint at dark. How strange that I, who struggle to avoid what's personal, despite myself must feed on inner history. Tradition's king, without forbear or heir, I birth the void, and move in measures still unpedigreed. My every thing becomes its counter thing. You're lone, who then devised the torment love. Oh, Thomas Stearns, a thrift-taught upright boy, you're dodging cutting loose. Although the dove descending breaks the air, it brings no joy. A static view, maybe some stoic lack regards the present with opprobrium. Your absolute keeps tending to look back and shudders at the shape of things to come. In mixing reminiscence and desire, the soul sap quivers, brief sun flames the ice. Unless restored by that refining fire, your daring must fall short of paradise. And yet, old Possum, your quartets entrance, when from the still point you still stir the dance. My driving will, my mother's driven son, my artist's cold, both Brahmin and urbane, was I all things to all and friend to none? To be a poet cost me too much pain. Although to thaw my ego I had learned, to woo a God with prayer and discipline, surrounded by a sense of grace discerned, yet even hard-won faith was honed within. But wait, once for delete instead write stet, and let my lover's voice just soar to life. A fifth quartet, or should I say quintet? One carefree dedication to my wife, to whom God knows I owe my leap's delight. So I move then to heaven, where, as I said, but here, rather than having 5 people represent in heaven, I wanted abundance, so I have 15. So here they come: Dante, Shakespeare, Herbert, Basho, Bach, Mozart, Coleridge, the Brownings, George Eliot, Cézanne, Willa Cather, Marc Chagall, Patrick Kavanagh, Messiaen, and Brian Friel, all 15. The late Brian Friel, I sent this canto to, and I got a wonderful reply from, I'm sure you all know him, the Irish playwright, Dancing at Lunas and so forth. He wrote back and he said he had been a senator in the Irish Senate and had gone to every meeting and never spoken. And he said to me, in the card he wrote back to me, he said, "In that company, I think I'll stay quiet." So I start with Dante because, after all, he had Virgil, and Dante is my guide. So, a long tradition. My Dante, tend nel mezzo del cammin, forgotten bulbs, your times again on earth, your gift to see a flowering unforeseen, to rake the soil for Europe's lush rebirth. A rich pre-modern mind allows you mix rife thoughts retrieved with things so up to date, in science, art, or purse and politics, the cosmos in your seedbed city-state. Your lily sign, Firenze's exiled sun. What is that place? Why is that place assailed by so much strife? Who'll name and face dead figures one by one, descending and ascending after life, by conscious metaphor and fact combined, you parallel the purpose of God's mind. Ah, yes, the middle of the way, and yet recall the years I yearned a troubadour for Beatrice since May Day when we met one fateful moment in 1284. I break new ground and graft a comedy. I'm politician, poet, citizen. Though love can shape a tongue in Tuscany, I end an exile, never home again. With Virgil I will climb hell's deepest ice, to reach the doorway of the dead and weep till Beatrice, unknotting nerves in me, redeems my guilt, and braving paradise I dare allow my sacred poem to leap from where we are to where we're meant to be. You're polymath and eager pioneer, who doubling back becomes a daring scout, defining our modernity's frontier by summing up what somehow opens out. A fluke of birth, a lucky florowit, as banished and uncuddled by soft fame, you blamed affectors, sham and counterfeit. Unhampered, your cold hell will name and shame. But more, as certain as the second thief, this day in paradise you too are shown, the smile whose warmth unzips the lily's leaf, the light eternal in itself alone. You're stretching still my mind and my desire to walk our daring God of love's high wire. But 7 centuries beyond my theme, you've chosen to pursue the selfsame path, and summing up a nearer work the seam between the modern and its aftermath. You've climbed from hell to heaven's vertigo, I'll be your guide. Though dazzled in that gaze, allow flawed words their spill and overflow, for God delights in lily-gilding praise. Imagine all we've done or left undone, our broken longings still for more, completed in the glory of one glance, as both stars and atoms dance and dance, our lives unreal around one loving core. where all our wills and all desires are one. Another who came up for honorable mention from Jeremy last night, Bach, is here. You know what they famously said, that Bach wrote for God, Mozart wrote for music, and Beethoven wrote for Beethoven. Isn't it hard to imagine how Bach went so out of fashion, completely out of fashion, like Shakespeare, and only under the guidance of Mendelssohn was he brought back. Hard to imagine a world without him. Just as your father's great-grandfather Veit, a miller lutus played while his mills ground, you, Meister Bach, like him take huge delight in criss-cross lines of layered woven sound. 5 generations so deep-rooted in a love of German Lutheran chorale, your contrapunctal God can underpin with joy. Nun freut euch, Gottes Kinder all. As Veit's lute played against the grain he'd grind, each line must make its own melodic sense, or chase one theme hot-heeled a bar behind, to weave a music that's both one and dense. Such joy in what free wheels and interwines, incarnate heaven held between the lines. My spirit spilt its tears in hard-won art, cantata turning week by week to years, as from a honed and faithful cantor's heart, I offered God the music of his spheres. Long practice finds impromptu forms of prayer as prayer in turn is processed by its form. A carelessness attained by years of care, serenity that takes the ear by storm. To rid my favorite hymns of rust-like spoors, cascades of color suddenly astound in point and counterpoint, I unpod a seed of dormant melody that soars in ruffled blooms to coruscate around the cantus firmus of capacious God. Inveterate reviser, you amend to near a needin you're reminded of. A need for flawlessness that in the end, you know, can only hint at heaven's love. A rich and careful cast of mind can sprout an endless growth engraved in simple germs, motifs that flower in tunes and turned inside out, traditions you transpose beyond their terms. Such flourishing is where all musics meet, as in perfection, futures spring alive. Romantics cry in moody cello suites, and jazz feeds Brandenburg Concerto 5. Is God's precision bursting at the seams in music ripe with tautly raveled themes? My own taskmaster, matching work and flair, a thoroughness became my theme for life, my tour de force, well-tempered clavier, those 6 carnations, plants to please my wife, are sending her a linnet that would sing partitas, passions, minor mass in B, the 6-part fugue I coaxed for Potsdam's king. The same painstaking flared intensity. 2 centuries before my works refound, did my perfection cause a fashion shift? Eclipsed by chords, a rage for cleaner lines, as roots stream up their flowerings underground, I'll serve my God and neighbor with my gift, and hold my bloom until a heaven shines. you think Jeremy's a candidate for heaven? I just one more figure from paradise, from heaven. All my three favorite novelists are women: George Eliot, Willa Cather, and Sigrid Undset, the Norwegian novelist. Actually, two of them met on earth as well as in heaven. Willa Cather and Sigrid Undset met in New York during the war when she had to flee Norway. So my last figure from heaven I've chosen is Willa Cather. She is gone slightly, I think, out of fashion with American academics. But I think she's just absolutely extraordinary. So I have her here for you. I see you, Willa Cather, as you watch your grandma's turbaned, gold-skinned slaves return from Canada, where she decamped. You notch it up as grist for memory's quern. Transplanted to Nebraska's beardgrass plains, you root your teenage Red Cloud Prairie years among Bohemians, the Magyar Danes and Swedes, the Poles and Czechs, oh pioneers. And youth's outsider love in you will grow, the ousted Pueblo people's history, French missioners who plied New Mexico, Quebec's old settlers, lifelong constancy. A tune's persisting memories can taunt. Each story hallows childhood things that haunt. You can't both eat the cake and keep it whole. I choose devotion's cost and sacred call. Though sacrifice puts iron in the soul, my life and work and love are one in all. My models were the grassroots minds I knew, the frontier folk, my friends, a diary I burgle, yet I know how I imbue my men and women with so much of me. Yet sagas don't conform to our design. When artists love their art above all things, so much it seems seeps through ambition's sieve. Both Thea Kronberg's thoughts and dreams are mine. A married nightingale so seldom sings. My stories only know the life I live. Yet music's your life's passion and delight, and every word a tone and tact you choose. Your lover Edith Lewis was so right to praise the riffs and rhythms in your prose. For you, the new world's yearning Largo sees, night's scattered lights of settlers' lives that part in miles of maize and beardgrass symphonies, and hum the songs of Europe's homesick heart. Another novel seemed to want to brew, but Wolfgang Amadeus dazzles most. Those final infirm years he bams you to. Will Bart and Albert Einstein both play host and welcome you beyond the Wailing Wall to paradise regained for good and all? Once art for art itself, or so I thought. Unfolding people's souls at story pace, I fell in love with them and found I caught God's glimpse of glory in each human face. The little blue-stem grass in spring that grew turns gently red once autumn has begun. I learn with years to bless both red and blue. For me, both faith and art would merge as one. The patient bending trees, the patient lives, the sum of small and daily things we do, more than the plot our grand dramatic parts, are now that neither passes nor arrives, finds wholeness under heaven's overview. All histories begin in human hearts. To close, I want to read the final 2 or 3 pages of the 5 quintets, which it's in the meaning section, that's theology, philosophy, it's in the heaven, and I spend 5 days in this heaven with the 5 different characters in conversation. I'm guided by 5 wonderful women, my late wife Breeds, by Aisha, the prophet's wife, by the Shulamite, by Beatrice, and finally by the Virgin Mary. And the people who are in conversation in this paradise are Jean Vanier, who I'm glad to say had read the 5 quintets before he left us, John the 23rd, Hannah Arendt, Nurshi, and Bonhoeffer. So I will read you just the final section of the 5 quintets. As you'll probably notice, it's in terza rima in homage to Dante. I thank my saints, but now a dazzling light begins to draw me to itself and woo me in the way a lover can invite you closer, still without compelling you. At once your oldest and your latest flame, renewing thrills of your first rendezvous, a date with your one love and lifelong aim, a sweet compulsion burning from within that makes you want to drop your lover's name. To miss this mark is still the only sin. But following a gleam, I'm now drawn home, a love returning to its origin. Is this the pull of wholeness, a shalom, that both attracts and gives a prepaid peace? I'm walking an arcade of trees, a dome of branches thickly leaved and of a piece, as though I'm moving in parentheses, where there is both excitement and release from any inattention or unease which could distract me from the arch's eye, where flooding light and rumors of a breeze round off a blazing horizontal sky which beckons me onwards, and I respond. And yet, for all this tunnel vision, I am certain still that this is not some fond farewell, and that I've never been so close to all I love, as moving now beyond the time and place of 2-dimensioned prose, I hunger for the eye that beckons me along a funneled path between 2 rows of slightly tilted boles where every tree is interwoven with its counterpart, convexing such a leafy canopy where opposites can meet and then depart in curves of paradox which shape the light. I can't yet understand, but know by heart that nothing but desire can underwrite my passage through this vaulted, light-led zone, that in the archer's eye all things unite. I'm solo here, but still not on my own. Becoming more myself in resonance with those I love, I'm never all alone. Already in this arch as I advance, my loneness wound is healing in the eye, whose rays now lead me to a sky-lit dance, a dizzy whirl, a giddy dervish high that pulses onwards to an ecstasy once savored for its wistful passing by. But dance no longer needs a brevity to add an edge to what might quickly pall. It peaks beyond my wildest fantasy, that as it climaxes and seems to fall, the moment when a pleasure might abscond, it hasn't neared its apogee at all, but peaks again and so beyond, surprising me with infinite excess that nothing I have known can correspond to such abundant joy, and or could express a sweetness like the moment's lover's bond in dewy aftermath without tristesse. So glistening and delighted in their fond embrace, just thrilling at each tipping kiss as willows glance the surface of a pond. My vase remembers every touch of bliss, each love knot in our pleasure's daisy chain. Although no memory compares with this, Each nervelet and synapses in my brain finds images among its brick and brack to help an aging vessel to contain such joy. Just as some jumper stepping back before a leap recalls an old success, I bring to mind from my own beaten track delights I've known, the follies of jeunesse, the throb of what's achieved, or things explored, each rush when head and heart could coalesce, the high those times the body too had soared, and years of training paid off dividends, the ball I intercepted and so scored. But most of all, together with my friends, around a table when we drank and ate, those evenings when time's rigid arrow bends. But now such pleasure all accumulate in tributaries that can amplify a whole creation flowing here in spate. Be with me now, my saints and stars, as I approach the glory hole of light, which shone all day and now fires up the evening sky like Moses' burning bush that draws me on along this rouging corridor to where the last loose branches in their pink chiffon of leaves half roof the gap to form a pair, and every bole and limb begins to dance. The universe's light, fantastic prayer now lauds a wooer taking still a chance on just this cosmic ballet's elegance, where nothing is decided in advance, where hadrons jiggle in their resonance, while galaxies bebop and flowers blaze in cedars, and while animals I glance, a daily choreography of praise. O suitor, never holding us in thrall, but trusting to the ragtime of our ways, as in our brokenness we only fall, to rise where all who've come have come by choice. Let's dance across creation's dancing hall. In shadows of your wing, I will rejoice. Sound now the bird of jazz's trumpet call. Oh, Mihol, Mihol, cries a lover's voice. Yes, here I am, my madam all in all. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mihal, for that splendid reading of some small part of your remarkable poem. I actually thought you were going to give us Picasso as well, in the depths of hell, more or less.
Yes, I cut hell on such a beautiful morning. Yes.
Well, a few words first from me, and then some conversation. The first thing I want to offer is simply a word of appreciation for the range and scope of the achievement of this poetic work. And that appreciation, I think, can be found for me at three different levels. First of all, level one, what you've offered us is a dazzlingly erudite survey of the intellectual and cultural history from the dawn of modernity to the present time. Not only literature and the arts are surveyed, as you've indicated, we've heard a bit of that here this morning, but also economics, politics, science, and philosophy and theology. I myself was particularly stunned by the science section, which improbably makes brilliant poetry out of quantum theory and subatomic particle physics. Partly because I know nothing about any of that, and I'm just amazed that you were able to master this and make it accessible. So, to take a few words from John Donne, as you have scripted it for him in the sonnet you write for him, I bless your Dantean sweep of humankind.
Thank you.
With deep appreciation. Second level to appreciate is the technically elegant poetic performance. It's a sometimes breathtaking high-wire act of literary art. Not only the haiku structure in part one, and by the way, I noticed you didn't read us the haiku portions of that. You may want to comment on that. Yeah. But perhaps even more, your decision to attempt terza rima in part 5, which is almost impossible in English, and your achievement of that is extraordinary. So the technically elegant poetic performance of part 2 is the second level, of the appreciation. But thirdly, I would want to say that this is a powerful work of Christian testimony, giving our witness, to use the term that Jeremy proposed last night. It gives voice to a vision of the joyful, unpredictable, all-encompassing, eschatologically healing overflow of God's love, God's grace, and God's love. It's just extraordinary. I started to say that we arrive at the final pages of this poem with the impulse to get on our knees and give thanks. But I think that's wrong. The only proper response to the testimony of 5 quintets is to get up on our feet, lost in wonder, love, and praise, and to bust a move, to dance across creation's dancing hall. When I finished reading the poem, I couldn't help thinking of an evening 5 or 6 years ago. Neil knows what I'm going to say. When my wife Judy and I had a group of friends gathered at our home for a Dita event. Ray Barfield and I were playing rock and roll guitar. I think maybe it was Chuck Berry.
That's right, yes.
Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. I don't think it was Roll Over Beethoven. It might have been Johnny Be Good. But anyway, Michal got up on his feet and danced joyfully with my wife, Judy. Those of you who are married men in the audience may appreciate that my exhilaration at the moment was tinged by some degree of concern and jealousy. But this event was, I think, for those of us who participated in it, a small anticipation of the joyful heavenly feast that is depicted in the final pages of the 5 quintets. It was an anticipation of the new creation. So, that's enough of my evaluative remarks or by way of appreciation, but now I want to pose a few questions, if I may.
Yes.
One of the joys of this for me as a New Testament scholar is actually being to have a conversation with the author. How often I have wished to sit down like this with the Apostle Paul and to say, please explain to me whatever, or the evangelist Mark, for example, who notoriously enigmatic. But in any case, I'm simply going to pose a few questions and see what you would like to say by way of response. So my first question is, who is Madame Jazz? And how, if at all, is she related to the 5 women who are your spiritual guides in the last section of the poem?
That's a tough one. I suppose I don't want to tie it down excessively because it is obviously a metaphor, but it has to do, obviously, with the great force of life, which we all want to dance to. I think that's the simplest answer I can give. The 5 people that guide me there are the equivalent of Beatrice, in other words, bringing you to that vision. Yeah. May I just make one comment on the remark you made about the dancing? This is a very personal comment on it, but what you didn't know at the time was that it was after my late wife had died, and it was the first time I came out of mourning was that evening when I danced. And what I didn't realize was I had just left meeting a woman in New York who I've since married. So the day before. Yeah. So it was a dance, a real dance.
It was extraordinary.
Yes.
So my first inclination was to think that Madame Jazz was your circumlocution or your symbol or something like that for the Holy Spirit.
Yes, that too.
That too.
Yeah, that too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right then.
Yes.
So here's my second question. Where is Jesus in the poem?
I think my fact that I am a Catholic, I think, informs the whole work. Mm-hmm. I think the whole, and I think probably the best answer in a way is I hope I show compassion right through the whole lot. You may notice that I said that I always give the last word to the figure I speak to, and that is a deliberate act of allowing them the act of redemption at the end, always. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not. I don't think Christ is there overtly, but I think the whole work is informed by my own background and by my faith.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, certainly. I just wonder whether you gave thought in the moving beatific vision section at the end to actually encountering Jesus in this vision of heaven. This may be a very Protestant question.
Yes. Well, I think I leave that for works to come.
Aha. Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the best answer. No, I don't think it would have. I don't think it would have been. I don't think artistically it would have been appropriate in the work, and I don't think even the way I saw it, I didn't think it was the place for it. But I don't exclude it in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right.
If that's not too evasive an answer.
No, it's not. It's not evasive. I did wonder, indeed, when I got to the end, whether there was yet more to come of this poem. And in the same way, I think you've wondered about Eliot, whether there should have been a fifth quintet.
Oh, dear.
You see what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to have you write some of these verses in the hell section for some of our contemporary political figures in the political section, for example.
Yes, yes.
But I shouldn't go there, yeah.
Yes. Mind you, I was very daring, as you know, because alongside Stalin, Hitler, Bin Laden, and what do you call him, the Bakhanov, the first guy, escapes me for a moment. Yeah. I have Margaret Thatcher. She's stuck between Hitler and Bin Laden, and I thought long and hard about that because. Normally, when I'm reading from that section from Hell, I do include Hitler, but Stalin rather is my usual one to include. But I always say that there was a more humane side to Hell, and that was Margaret Thatcher, and the less humane side the other. But I gave a reading in Florida last year, and a lady came up and attacked me afterwards for using the word humane about Margaret Thatcher. Yes.
I have. All right. Well, I have some other nominees there, but we won't go there. So let me ask you a very different kind of a question. Mm-hmm. This is a question now about the technical poetic artistry. Why did you decide to use such quite different poetic forms in the 5 major sections of the poem, the haikus in part 1, the terza rima in part 5, the iambic pentameter blank verse in the science. Was there some correspondence for you between the subject matter and the verse form that you chose for those sections?
Yes, I think is the answer to that, but let me explain it a little bit. Because Dante does his hell, purgatory, and heaven, all in terza rima, it's all of a piece. But because I was also I have a vertical structure as well as a horizontal structure. The horizontal structure being obviously the transition, the narrowing down, or so forth, the hell, purgatory, heaven. But I was doing it also vertically because I was doing arts, economics, politics, science, and philosophy / theology. So I thought about how I wanted to mark that. So I decided that to give a unity, to give a sense of coherence to each of the quintets, it needed a form of its own. So you have the parallels going across between the cantos, obviously, but I wanted to give unity in a vertical way to each of these domains. So that's the first thing. Then I want a mixture of tradition and of innovation. Because I'm not one of these people who believes in the left and the right. I believe that we have to conserve some things and we have to innovate in other places. It's not just a left. I think we're all trapped in that Parisian left and right thing, you know. So I wanted to do both. So let me take one by one. The first one, which I'm very flattered that you keep referring to as a psycho because it's a term I invented. And the psycho is what I've done. I didn't read when I was reading these conversations because it makes it too complex when you're actually projecting it. I actually intersperse all those sonnets with haikus using an image, either a bird or a plant or something, for the particular person involved. But it's too complex when you're reading it, so I leave it out. But the psycho is this combination of a sonnet and a haiku. And I thought when I was doing the arts, the perfect thing to do was to take the most classical Western form and the most classical Eastern form and make them work together like this. So the haiku form is like a chorus, in a Greek chorus, or the clown in Shakespeare. It's a secondary comment, if you see what I mean. It comments on it at a secondary level. So that seemed appropriate for the arts one. For the science one was my model for the science one was very much Milton in some ways, and it starts with this invocation, which is very Milton-esque, and it fell naturally into iambic pentameter, and so I pursued that right through it. And it also, because in that one on the science, I intersperse each section with a quotation either from the Hebrew Bible or from the Quran. But they fell into iambic pentameter very nicely in translations as well. So that worked well for me. So that's the technical side of the arts of the science one. So the final one is in terza rima, and that was, of course, the obvious thing when you're doing such a Dantean approach to things to do it, but also for formal reasons, because I wanted to. Well, you heard the final bit. I wanted it to build up, and there's something about terza rima that builds up this extraordinary momentum. I don't know if you could hear it when I was reading it, but it keeps this chain effect, keeps building the momentum towards the final vision of when you meet Madame Jazz. So that was my choice for the. Mind you, as Richard said, it's made for Italian because all words in Italian, the canonical form of a word in Italian ends in a vowel. Try it in English. It's very, very tricky because you don't have everything ending in a vowel. So the other two also have form, but they're invented forms. The economics one and the politics one and the economics one. I'm trying to remember which is which. I think is it the economics one where I have 10, and I think is it 2 and 6 match and 8 and 10 rhyme the whole time throughout it. It's a very strict form, in fact. And then where the people speak, I use a different form where I think it's 1 and 3 and 4 and 5 and so on. So it's a very strict form, but it's an invented form. So it is that combination of tradition and innovation.
I'm happy you referred to Milton with regard to the science section 4. I was thinking about this problem of form and rhyme and so on. I went back and looked at Milton's prefatory note to Paradise Lost, where he says, quote, that rhyme is, rhyme is, quote, the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame meter.
Yes.
And he intends, he says, to present his iambic blank verse as an example, quote, of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming.
Because it's fascinating that, isn't it? Because in Old Irish you had syllabic poetry, and then it became an assonance developed when actually under the influence of French words which changed the accent in some dialects. And I believe in the Chinese it's the same. Something happened that changed the whole form linguistically, changed the whole fashion in terms of metrics and sound and so forth. But of course, we have to actually, the wonderful thing about the beatniks and this, they ran away from form of any sort, and it's a very American thing. Spontaneity is everything, and if you're not spontaneous, it's all false, Yeah. But of course, I think it's art, so it's a mixture of spontaneity and deliberate form. And so I think we're free now, actually, because of the move away from form, to use it again freshly, and to retrieve some of the tradition without it being sing-song.
Yeah, good. Last question before we then take questions from the audience. This is a ridiculous question to ask you to answer, but in short order. But the thing I'm left with at the end is this: can we expect, in our experience, to enter into the eschatological joy that your poem celebrates and portends? Or how is our present experience of ambiguity and pain related to new creation?
Is this to me or the audience?
That's to you. That's to you. If someone in the audience has the answer, I'd like to know.
I'm sure they have a better answer than me. Well, what can I say except that I've had a wonderfully blessed life. I've had a wonderful life. I had a 44-year marriage, which was heavenly. And then I went through the terrible suffering of losing that, which was the absolute lowest point of my life. And yet, I got through that I wrote a book about it called One Crimson Thread, but I got through it on the one thing, which was gratitude. Yes. And I honestly believe that by bringing the past with you with gratitude and leaving the future open with hope, you can live in the now of the eternal. That's the best answer I can give.
Amen. Well, let's hear what you would like to ask of Micheál O'Shield. There's a question in the back.
Thank you for this. In this morning's homily, Malcolm Guite suggested that the moment a poem becomes a poem is the moment of encounter between the reader and the mind of the reader and the mind of the poet. And I'm curious what you think of this, and if this is complicated at all by the way that you've used persona poems.
Did I use what, sorry?
Persona poems inhabited the personas of of these other writers. How would you imagine readers responding and encountering this poem?
Yeah, well, I think there seems to be two questions together there, if I've got it right. I mean, yes, I think the whole notion is that, and I think Malcolm hinted at that this morning too. I mean, you see, the whole business of going down into, there was a fashion for this confessional poet, and so what was it? You used some phrase like "shining forth your fractured self" or something. That was very fashionable. Of course, the real truth is that if you, or at least my belief is that if you go deep enough into the truth in yourself, it will resonate with the truth in someone else. But it's the meeting of two experiences: your life, the person who's writing its life, and the other person's life finding a meeting point. I mean, otherwise it doesn't, either imaginatively or in experience. So it is that meeting, I think. As for, I'm not sure how to connect that with your second part of your question about putting words in the mouth of people. I mean, the truth is, look, if you think of Dante, when he was getting a bit soft-hearted in hell, is called back by Virgil, the Stoic, and saying, come on, these are evil people, and so on. And Dante has to pull himself together and not be too sympathetic, you know. In the end, when you think about it, that's Dante talking to himself. So maybe when you're actually writing in the voice of other people, you are also expressing yourself to a point. It's a sort of a ventriloquist act. Sorry, am I doing something with the microphone? No? Is this me? Okay.
Oh, Malcolm. Just very quick. First of all, say, I mean, this is amazing, and it's so good that you've done this.
Thank you.
I wanted to respond to just that last thing about the persona, and since that was raised, and you mentioned, just there's a throwaway line.
Sorry?
There's a throwaway line by Coleridge in one of his letters, I think, where the old thing is he's being accused of plagiarism, you know, that he's sort of channeling too much of the German philosophers and there is notes. And at one point he sort of shrugs his shoulders and he says, truth is the divine ventriloquist. It doesn't matter which of us dummies he speaks through. That in a sense there's the very act, I think, poetically of imagining the other, just like Dante imagined Virgil and then imagined what Virgil would say now as though Virgil were his contemporary. In reading these is that daring to give a voice to the other has liberated something in you. It's allowed you to say things that are there for you to say and in one sense are yours, but the possibility of the voice of the other has allowed you to speak them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Malcolm. I think it is so. I mean, it's pretty presumptuous to have somebody bless your Dantean sweep. Yeah. But of course, I'm encouraging myself. Yes.
Could I just say, by the way, that in terms of heavenly conversation, what we've just heard is a snatch of conversation between two of the great poets of our time. Thank you. Other questions?
Gosh, I could have left Picasso in.
Good
I
one.
was saving time.
But we don't want to end with him. If there are no questions, we can adjourn then to a feast of lunch, and in anticipation of the remaining feast of the other events throughout this weekend of the DETA 10 conference. Let's say a word of thanks to Michal for his reading, and to Jeremy. Is Jeremy still here? Well, then we'll say thanks in absentia to Jeremy for his composition and performance of those interpreted pieces. So thank you very much from you all.